The gunshot echoed through the canyon just as Cassidy Collins felt her knees give out, and she stumbled forward into the clearing where a lone campfire flickered against the approaching darkness of the Wyoming wilderness. Austin Vaughn looked up from the rabbit he'd been skinning, his hand instinctively moving toward the Colt at his hip, before he registered that the woman collapsing near his fire wasn't a threat to anyone, least of all him. She was rail-thin, her dress torn and filthy, her dark hair matted with dirt and what looked like dried blood. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her face sunburned to the point of blistering. When she tried to speak, only a croaking sound emerged before her eyes rolled back and she crumpled completely to the ground. "Jesus," Austin muttered, abandoning his dinner preparations and rushing to her side. He'd been alone for 3 weeks now, making his way from Cheyenne to Scottsbluff with a herd of 30 horses he planned to sell. And he hadn't expected company, especially not like this. He knelt beside her, pressing 2 fingers to her throat. Her pulse was thready but present, and when he lifted one of her eyelids gently, he could see she was still with him, just barely. Her skin was hot to the touch, fever burning through her despite the cool October evening settling around them. Austin had seen men die of thirst and exposure during his years working cattle drives and knew the signs. This woman wouldn't last the night without water and food. He moved quickly, retrieving his canteen and carefully tilting her head up, letting just a few drops of water fall onto her cracked lips. Too much too fast would make her sick, might even kill her if her body couldn't handle it. She stirred slightly at the moisture, a small sound escaping her throat. Her eyes fluttered but didn't open. Austin continued the slow process, giving her small amounts of water every few seconds, watching as her body began to respond. After several minutes, she swallowed reflexively, and he took that as a good sign. The gunshot that had preceded her arrival still bothered him. Someone had been shooting, and whether they'd been shooting at her or she'd been running from something else entirely, he didn't know. But the Wyoming Territory in 1883 wasn't exactly a safe place for a woman alone, and the fact that she'd ended up in this condition told him she'd been through hell. He needed to get her warmed up and fed, but first he had to make sure whoever had fired that shot wasn't coming this way. Austin grabbed his rifle and did a quick sweep of the perimeter, his horses nickering softly in their makeshift rope corral about 50 yards from camp. Everything seemed quiet except for the usual sounds of night settling over the high plains, the distant call of a coyote, the rustle of prairie grass in the wind. Satisfied they were alone for now, Austin returned to the woman and carefully lifted her. She weighed almost nothing, and he could feel every rib through the thin fabric of her dress as he carried her closer to the fire. He laid her on his bedroll, then grabbed his spare blanket and covered her, tucking it around her thin frame. The rabbit was half prepared, so he finished the job quickly and got it cooking over the fire. While it sizzled, he continued giving the woman water in small increments. After about 20 minutes, her eyes finally opened, unfocused and confused. "Easy now," Austin said softly, keeping his voice low and calm like he would with a spooked horse. "You're safe. You're in my camp and I'm going to help you." She stared at him, and he could see her trying to process his words. Her lips moved and he leaned closer to hear. "They killed them," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Everyone." Austin felt his jaw tighten. "Who killed who, my family? The wagon train. Raiders came. 3 days ago, maybe 4, I don't know, I ran." Tears began streaming down her sunburned cheeks. "I just ran." He'd heard stories of wagon trains being attacked, though it was less common now than it had been years ago. But it still happened, especially in the more remote areas where law was scarce and desperate men did desperate things. "How long have you been walking?" he asked. I don't know. Days. No water. I thought I was going to die. You almost did, Austin said honestly, but you're alive now and I've got food and water. You're going to be all right. She closed her eyes again, fresh tears squeezing out. Austin felt something twist in his chest at the sight. He'd been alone for so long, focused only on his horses and making enough money to eventually buy his own ranch, that he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to care about another person's suffering. His own family had been gone for 5 years now, lost to influenza one brutal winter, and he'd been drifting ever since, working other men's cattle, breaking other men's horses, never staying in one place long enough to form attachments. But looking at this broken woman in his camp, something shifted inside him. She needed help, and he was the only one here to give it. The rabbit finished cooking, and Austin carefully pulled off small pieces of the tender meat, letting them cool before offering them to her. You need to eat. Just small bites. Your stomach won't be able to handle much at first. Cassidy opened her eyes again and tried to sit up. Austin helped her, supporting her back as she struggled to stay upright. He handed her a small piece of meat, and she took it with shaking hands, bringing it to her mouth. She chewed slowly, as if she'd forgotten how, then swallowed. He watched her carefully, ready to help if she started to choke or get sick. More, she whispered after a moment. In a bit. Let's see how that settles first. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the fire crackling between them. Austin studied her more carefully now. Despite the sunburn and dirt and obvious signs of trauma, he could see she was young, probably in her early 20s, with fine features and dark eyes that held a world of pain. There was something in her face, a determination perhaps, that told him she was stronger than she looked. I'm Austin Vaughn, he said. I'm a horse trader heading to Scottsbluff. Cassidy Collins, she replied, her voice slightly stronger now. We were heading to Oregon. My parents and my 2 brothers. We'd been traveling for 2 months. The way she said were told Austin everything he needed to know about their fate. He gave her another piece of rabbit, then some more water. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. That shouldn't have happened to you or your family. There were 7 of them, Cassidy continued, as if she needed to say it out loud. They came at dawn. We tried to fight, but we were just farmers. We didn't know how to. My father told me to run. The last thing he said was run, so I did. I heard the shots behind me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Austin remained quiet, letting her talk. Sometimes words were the only way to start healing, and she clearly needed to get this out. I had nothing. No food, no water, just this dress and my boots. I walked toward the sunset because someone once told me settlements were west. But everything looked the same, and I got turned around. I thought I was going to die out there. I wanted to die. But you didn't, Austin said firmly. You survived. That takes strength most people don't have. Cassidy looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. She saw a man in his mid-20s with weathered features and kind eyes, despite the hardness that living in this territory put on a person. His brown hair needed cutting, and his clothes were dusty from travel, but there was something solid about him, something trustworthy. Why are you helping me? She asked. Austin considered the question. Because you need help and I can give it doesn't seem more complicated than that. Most men would have. I'm not most men, he interrupted gently. You're safe here. I give you my word on that. Something in his tone made her believe him. Cassidy felt the tension she'd been carrying release slightly, though her body remained weak and trembling. Austin gave her more food and water over the next hour, small amounts at regular intervals, until finally her stomach seemed to settle and accept the nourishment. You should sleep, he said as the fire died down to glowing embers. I'll keep watch. We're safe here for tonight, and in the morning we'll figure out what comes next. What comes next? Cassidy repeated, the words sounding hollow. I have nothing. No family, no money, no belongings. I don't even know where I am. You're about 3 days' ride from Scottsbluff, Nebraska, if we take it slow. There's a town there, people. We'll get you somewhere safe." Cassidy nodded numbly, exhaustion overwhelming everything else. Austin helped her lie back down on the bedroll and made sure she was covered with the blanket. Within minutes, she was asleep, her breathing finally evening out into something more natural than the shallow gasps she'd been taking earlier. Austin moved away from the fire and took up a position where he could watch both his horses and the surrounding area. He checked his rifle, making sure it was loaded and ready, then settled in for a long night. The woman's story troubled him deeply. Raiders this far north weren't common, but they weren't unheard of either. Groups of desperate or evil men who preyed on settlers still existed, and the law was too thinly spread to do much about it. He found himself glancing back at Cassidy frequently, making sure she was still breathing, still alive. Something about her situation had gotten under his skin in a way he hadn't expected. Maybe it was because he'd lost his own family and understood what it meant to be suddenly alone in the world. Maybe it was because he'd been drifting without purpose for so long that helping someone else gave him something to focus on besides the next job, the next town, the next lonely camp. Or maybe, though he barely wanted to admit it to himself, it was because even half-starved and traumatized, there was something about her that drew him in. A quiet strength beneath the trauma, a will to survive that matched the harsh landscape around them. Dawn came slowly, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of pink and gold. Austin had dozed fitfully through the night, waking at every sound, but nothing had disturbed their camp. His horses grazed peacefully in their corral, and Cassidy slept on, her body finally getting the rest it desperately needed. He built up the fire and started coffee, then checked through his supplies. He had enough food for both of them if they were careful, and water wouldn't be a problem as long as they stayed near the creek that ran through this area. The bigger question was what to do about Cassidy. She couldn't stay out here, and she clearly had nowhere else to go. Scottsbluff was his destination, a growing town in western Nebraska that served as a trading post and supply center for the surrounding ranches and farms. He'd been planning to sell his horses there, and possibly look for work on one of the larger spreads in the area. But now his plans felt less certain, complicated by the responsibility of another human being who needed help. Cassidy stirred as the smell of coffee reached her, and her eyes opened slowly. For a moment she looked confused, then memory returned and her expression crumpled. "It wasn't a dream," she said softly. "No," Austin replied, bringing her coffee and some jerky he'd softened in water. "But you're alive, and that counts for something." She sat up slowly, wincing at the pain in her muscles. Every part of her body hurt, from her blistered feet to her sunburned face. But the crushing thirst and gnawing hunger had abated somewhat, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that went beyond the physical. "What am I going to do?" she asked, not really expecting an answer. Austin sat down across from her, his own coffee cup in hand. "First, you're going to eat and drink and get your strength back. Then we're going to head to Scottsbluff. It's a decent town and there are options there. You could find work, maybe with a family that needs help or at one of the businesses." "I don't have anything," Cassidy said, her voice breaking. "No references, no skills beyond basic farm work. Who would hire me? Someone will. You're a hard worker, I can tell that much, and you're a survivor. That matters out here." Cassidy looked down at her battered hands, at the broken nails and scraped palms. "I don't feel like a survivor. I feel like I should have died with them." "Don't say that," Austin said firmly. "Your father told you to run because he wanted you to live. Honor that, live." The words hit her hard and fresh tears came, but she nodded. Austin was right. Her father had given her a chance, and wasting it would make his sacrifice meaningless. She had to find a way forward, even though right now she couldn't see how. They spent the rest of the morning at the camp. Austin insisted Cassidy rest and recover, giving her food and water at regular intervals, and checking that her sunburn wasn't getting infected. He found some salve in his pack that helped soothe the worst of the burns, and he gave her clean water to wash her face and hands. "We'll head out tomorrow," he decided. "Give you one more day to get stronger. The journey to Scottsbluff will be easier on horseback, and I've got plenty." "I can't pay you," Cassidy said. "I'm not asking you to. Consider it a loan if that makes you feel better. You can pay me back someday when you're on your feet." She studied him, this stranger who'd shown her more kindness in one night than some people experienced in a lifetime. "Why are you really doing this? You could have just pointed me toward town and sent me on my way." Austin was quiet for a moment, watching the fire. "I lost my family 5 years ago, all of them in one winter. Influenza took my parents and my younger sister. I had a brother, but he'd already headed east to work in the factories. Haven't heard from him since. When they died, I felt like I'd lost my purpose. I'd been working our family land, planning to build it into something. After they were gone, none of it mattered anymore. I sold the place and started drifting, working for other people, never staying anywhere long." He looked up at her, and Cassidy saw understanding in his eyes. "Maybe helping you is helping me remember what it feels like to have a purpose again, to matter to someone, even if it's just for a little while." Cassidy felt something shift in her chest at his honesty. This man who'd saved her life was as lost as she was, just in a different way. They were both survivors of tragedy, both trying to figure out what came next. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for being honest with me and for everything else. You're welcome." They settled into an easy quiet, the kind that comes when two people understand each other without needing to fill every silence with words. Austin worked on maintaining his tack and checking his horses while Cassidy rested, gradually regaining strength as the day wore on. That evening, Austin shot a prairie chicken and cooked it slowly over the fire, making sure there was plenty for both of them. Cassidy's appetite had improved dramatically, and though she still needed to be careful not to overeat, she managed to get down a decent portion of meat along with some beans Austin had soaking. "Tell me about your horses," Cassidy said as they ate. She needed to think about something other than her tragedy, needed normal conversation to anchor her to the present rather than the nightmares of the past. Austin's face lit up in a way it hadn't before. "They're good stock. Mix of Mustangs and quarter horses I've been gathering and training over the past year. The Mustangs I caught wild in Colorado, and the quarter horses I bought or traded for along the way. Most of them are green broke but gentle enough. Should fetch good prices in Scottsbluff." "You trained them yourself, most of them." "I've got a way with horses, always have. They make more sense to me than people usually do." He paused, then added with a small smile, "Present company excluded." Cassidy found herself smiling back, the expression feeling strange on her face after days of terror and grief. "I like horses too. We had 2 pulling our wagon. Good, steady animals. I wonder what happened to them." "Raiders probably took them," Austin said honestly. "Horses are valuable." The mention of the raiders sobered them both. Cassidy set down her plate, her appetite suddenly gone again. "You think they're still out there?" she asked quietly. "Looking for me? Probably not. Raiders don't usually track individuals, and you've been walking for days. You could be anywhere. They likely took what they wanted and moved on. I hope they hang for what they did. They might if they're ever caught. Law is getting stronger out here, even if it's slow." Cassidy nodded, though she doubted those men would ever face justice. The West was too big, too wild, and men could disappear into it and never be found. That night, Austin insisted she take the bedroll again while he kept watch. Cassidy protested, but he was firm, and she was still too weak to argue much. She fell asleep to the sound of him humming softly, some tune she didn't recognize, and for the first time since the attack, she didn't dream of blood and gunfire. Morning came clear and cool, perfect weather for traveling. Austin saddled two of his gentler horses, a steady bay mare for Cassidy and his own buckskin gelding for himself. He rigged a lead line for the other horses to follow, a skill he'd perfected over months of traveling alone. Cassidy watched him work, impressed by his efficiency and the obvious care he took with the animals. Each horse got checked over, hooves inspected, tack adjusted perfectly. They responded to him with trust, and she could see why. He had patience and a calm presence that put them at ease. "You ready?" he asked once everything was prepared. Cassidy looked down at herself. She was still wearing her torn, filthy dress, and she probably looked as bad as she felt. But she was alive, and she was stronger than she'd been 2 days ago, and that would have to be enough. "Ready as I'll ever be." Austin helped her mount the bay mare, his hands steadying her when she wobbled. She hadn't ridden in weeks, and her body protested the position, but she gritted her teeth and settled into the saddle. The mare stood patiently, and Cassidy stroked her neck gratefully. "Her name's Rosie," Austin said. "She's gentle as they come. Just let her follow my horse and she'll take care of you." They set out heading southeast toward Nebraska, moving at an easy pace that ate up miles without exhausting either the horses or Cassidy. The country opened up before them in rolling prairie grassland, broken occasionally by rocky outcrops and dry creek beds. It was beautiful in its own harsh way, and Cassidy found herself appreciating it despite everything. Austin pointed out landmarks as they rode, teaching her to read the land the way he did. Where to find water, how to tell direction by the sun and stars, which plants were edible and which would make you sick. She absorbed the information gratefully, realizing these were survival skills she'd need if she was going to make a life out here. They talked as they traveled, sharing stories from their pasts. Cassidy told him about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about her brothers who'd constantly teased her but also protected her fiercely. She talked about her mother's garden and her father's laugh, and all the small details that made them real people, not just victims of violence. Austin shared his own memories, the good times before the influenza came. He talked about teaching his sister to ride, about working alongside his father building fence and breaking horses. He spoke of dreams he'd once had for a spread of his own, dreams that had died with his family but were maybe starting to stir again. As the day wore on, Cassidy found herself watching Austin more than the landscape. There was something solid and reassuring about him, the way he sat his horse like he'd been born in the saddle, the way he constantly scanned their surroundings without seeming paranoid. He was prepared for trouble but not expecting it, confident without being cocky. And he was handsome, she realized with some surprise. Not in a refined way, but in the weathered, capable manner of men who lived and worked outdoors. His hands were calloused and strong, his shoulders broad from years of physical labor. When he smiled, which was happening more frequently as they talked, his whole face transformed. Cassidy caught herself and looked away, feeling almost guilty for noticing such things. Her family had been dead less than a week, and here she was thinking about how attractive her rescuer was. It felt wrong, disrespectful to their memory. But another part of her, the part that had survived when she could have given up, whispered that life went on. That her father had told her to run so she could live, and living meant more than just breathing. It meant feeling things, even confusing things like attraction to a kind stranger. They camped that night beside a creek, the sound of running water peaceful after the day's travel. Austin caught fish for dinner, and they ate sitting side by side on a fallen log, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. "Tomorrow we'll reach the North Platte River," Austin said. "Follow that east for a day and we'll be in Scottsbluff." "And then what?" Cassidy asked. The question had been weighing on her all day. Austin was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about that. I know a woman in Scottsbluff runs a boarding house. Mrs. Peterson. She's good people and she might have work for you, or at least a place to stay while you figure things out." "You've been very kind," Cassidy said softly. "I won't forget it." "I'm not planning to disappear once we get to town," Austin said, surprising himself as much as her with the words. "I mean, if you're comfortable with it, I'd like to make sure you're settled before I move on with my business." Cassidy felt warmth spread through her chest. "I'd like that." They sat together as darkness fell, neither wanting to move away from the other just yet. The night was full of stars, more than Cassidy had ever seen, and Austin pointed out constellations and told her their stories. His voice was soothing, and she found herself leaning slightly closer to hear better, their shoulders nearly touching. Austin was acutely aware of her proximity, of the way her hair caught the firelight and the sound of her quiet breathing. He hadn't felt this way about anyone in years, and the intensity of it caught him off guard. He'd known this woman for only 2 days, and yet something had shifted in him fundamentally. The loneliness that had been his constant companion felt less oppressive with her beside him. "Austin," Cassidy said quietly, "do you believe things happen for a reason?" He considered the question. "I don't know. Sometimes I think we just stumble into situations and then we decide what to make of them. You stumbled into my camp half-starved and I chose to help you. Maybe there's no grand reason beyond that, but maybe the choices we make are the meaning." "I think you're wiser than you let on," Cassidy said, "or maybe I've just had too much time alone to think." She laughed softly, and the sound made Austin smile. Just days ago she'd been on the edge of death, and now she was laughing. That felt like a victory worth celebrating. They turned in eventually, Austin again insisting Cassidy take the bedroll while he kept watch. But this time she argued more forcefully. "You need to sleep too," she said. "You've been up for 2 nights watching over me. We can share the bedroll. It's big enough and we can take turns keeping watch if you're worried about safety." Austin hesitated. It would be proper to refuse, to maintain distance. But the circles under his eyes were deep, and Cassidy was right that he needed rest. And the truth was, he trusted her to wake him if there was trouble. "All right," he agreed, "but you sleep first. I'll take the first watch and wake you in a few hours." They settled in with a respectful distance between them, both lying on their backs looking up at the stars. But the night was cold, and gradually they shifted closer, seeking warmth. By the time Austin woke Cassidy for her watch, they were pressed together, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest. Cassidy sat up carefully, not wanting to wake him more than necessary. "Your turn to rest," she whispered. Austin nodded sleepily and was out within seconds, exhaustion finally claiming him. Cassidy kept watch, feeding the fire and listening to the night sounds. She felt safe, safer than she had any right to feel given what she'd been through. But Austin's presence changed everything. With him, she could imagine a future that wasn't just survival but actually living. The night passed quietly, and when dawn came, Austin woke to find Cassidy asleep again, slumped beside him with her head on his shoulder. He didn't wake her right away, instead taking a moment to study her face in the soft morning light. She was pretty, he decided, though that felt like too simple a word. There was character in her features, strength in the set of her jaw even in sleep. "You're staring," Cassidy murmured, her eyes still closed. Austin started, embarrassed to be caught. "Sorry, I was just—" "It's all right." She opened her eyes and looked up at him. "I don't mind." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither quite wanted to name yet. Then Austin cleared his throat and moved to start breakfast, breaking the spell but not quite dispelling it. They were both quieter that morning as they prepared to ride, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. If anything, there was an intimacy to it, the ease of two people who were becoming comfortable with each other. The ride to the North Platte River took most of the morning. They reached it around midday, the water running swift and clear between sandy banks. Austin led them to a good crossing point, and they let the horses drink before continuing east along the river. The landscape began to change as they traveled, becoming more settled. They passed occasional homesteads, small farms carved out of the prairie where families were trying to make a life. Each time they saw people, Cassidy tensed, and Austin understood why. But no one bothered them, and most folks they encountered were friendly, offering waves and occasional news about the trail ahead. By late afternoon, the distinctive formation of Scottsbluff came into view, a massive outcropping of rock rising from the prairie like a beacon. Austin pointed it out to Cassidy. "That's where we're heading. The town's grown up around the formation, uses it as a landmark. It's a good place, growing fast because of the railroad coming through." Cassidy stared at the rock formation, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. Relief that their journey was almost over, anxiety about what came next. In the time she'd spent with Austin, a bubble had formed around them, just the two of them against the world. Once they reached town, that bubble would burst, and reality would intrude. "Are you scared?" Austin asked, reading her expression. "A little," she admitted. "Everything's going to change again." "Change isn't always bad, and I meant what I said. I'm not leaving you to face this alone." His words steadied her, and she nodded. They continued riding, and as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they finally entered Scottsbluff proper. The town was bigger than Cassidy expected, with a main street lined with businesses and side streets branching off toward residential areas. There was a hotel, a general store, a saloon, a church, and various other establishments that marked a growing frontier town. People moved about their business, and the sound of hammering indicated new construction somewhere nearby. Austin led them to a stable where he arranged to board his horses for the night. The stable owner, a grizzled man named Jack, greeted Austin like an old friend. "Back again, Vaughn. Thought you'd be in Colorado by now." "Plans changed," Austin said. "I've got 30 head to sell if you know anyone looking." "Always someone looking for good horses. We'll talk tomorrow." Jack's eyes slid to Cassidy with curiosity, but he was too polite to ask directly. "This is Miss Collins," Austin said. "She's had a rough time and needs a place to stay. I was thinking about taking her to Mrs. Peterson's boarding house." Jack nodded approvingly. "Good choice. Mary Peterson will treat her right." They left the horses in Jack's capable hands and walked through town toward the boarding house. Cassidy was painfully aware of how she must look, dirty and bedraggled in her torn dress, but Austin stayed close beside her, his presence a shield against stares and whispers. Mrs. Peterson's boarding house was a neat two-story building painted white with green shutters. A sign out front advertised rooms and meals at reasonable rates. Austin knocked, and after a moment the door opened to reveal a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Austin Vaughn," she said warmly. "What brings you back to Scottsbluff so soon?" "Hello, Mrs. Peterson. I need your help." He quickly explained Cassidy's situation, keeping the details brief but honest. Mrs. Peterson's expression shifted from welcoming to deeply sympathetic as she listened. "You poor dear," she said to Cassidy when Austin finished. Come in, come in. We'll get you cleaned up and fed properly, and then we'll talk about what comes next. Cassidy felt tears prick her eyes at the woman's kindness. I don't have money to pay you. We'll work something out, Mrs. Peterson said firmly. Right now you need care, and that's what matters. Austin, you're welcome to stay for dinner. I imagine you could use a proper meal yourself. I'd appreciate that, madam. Mrs. Peterson bustled Cassidy upstairs to a small but clean room with a real bed and a wash basin. She brought hot water and clean towels, along with a simple dress that had belonged to her daughter who'd since married and moved away. Take your time, dear. Clean up, rest if you need to. Dinner will be in an hour. Left alone, Cassidy stripped out of her ruined dress and washed thoroughly for the first time in over a week. The hot water stung her sunburned skin but also soothed, and she scrubbed away days of dirt and dried blood and fear. She put on the borrowed dress, which fit reasonably well, and combed through her tangled hair until it was smooth again. Looking at herself in the small mirror above the wash basin, she saw a different person than the one who'd stumbled into Austin's camp. She still looked thin and her face was healing from sunburn, but there was color in her cheeks again and life in her eyes. She was alive. Against all odds, she was alive. Downstairs, she found Austin cleaned up as well, his face freshly shaved and his hair combed back. He'd been given use of a room to wash, and the difference was striking. He looked younger without the trail dust and stubble, and when he saw her coming down the stairs, his expression made her heart skip. You look beautiful, he said, the words coming out before he could think better of them. Cassidy blushed. I look better than I did, at least. That too. Mrs. Peterson had prepared a substantial dinner of roast beef, potatoes, vegetables, and fresh bread. There were 3 other boarders at the table, men who worked at various jobs in town, and they were polite but clearly curious about the newcomers. Austin and Cassidy ate together, the good food and warm room making everything feel almost normal. After dinner, Mrs. Peterson invited them to sit in the parlor while she brought coffee. Once they were settled, she got down to business. Cassidy, I have a proposition for you. I need help running this place. Cooking, cleaning, helping with the laundry. It's hard work, but it comes with room and board and a small wage besides. If you're interested, the job is yours. Cassidy felt relief wash over her so strongly she almost cried. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. Good. You can start tomorrow. Take time to settle in. And Austin, I hear you're selling horses. How long will you be in town? A week, maybe 2. Depends on how fast I can move them. You're welcome to stay here as well. I've got a room available. Austin glanced at Cassidy, saw the hope in her eyes that he'd stay close, and made his decision. I'd appreciate that, Mrs. Peterson. Wonderful. Now I'll leave you 2 to talk. I imagine you have things to discuss. She left them alone in the parlor, and an awkward silence fell. They'd spent days together constantly, but somehow being in civilization again made everything feel different, more complicated. I'm glad you're staying, Cassidy said finally. I know you have business to attend to, but I've gotten used to having you around. I've gotten used to you too, Austin admitted. More than I probably should have in such a short time. Is there a rule about how quickly you can care about someone? Probably, but I never was good at following rules. Cassidy laughed, and the tension broke. They talked late into the evening, sitting close together on the sofa, their conversation ranging from serious to silly. Other boarders came and went, and Mrs. Peterson poked her head in occasionally, smiling to see them getting along so well. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with both of them. Austin walked Cassidy to her room upstairs, reluctant to say goodnight. Thank you, Cassidy said at her door, for everything. For saving my life, for bringing me here, for staying. You don't have to keep thanking me. I do, though. You gave me a future when I didn't think I had one." Austin reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture intimate and tender. "You gave me something too, a reason to stop drifting, a purpose." Cassidy leaned into his touch, her eyes searching his face. "What happens now? Now you settle in here, start your new job. And I sell my horses and figure out what I want to do next. And after that," Austin smiled, "I don't know, but I'd like to find out together if you're willing." "I'm willing." They stood there for another moment, neither wanting to separate. Then Austin forced himself to step back to give her space. "Good night, Cassidy." "Good night, Austin." She closed her door, and Austin made his way to his own room, feeling lighter than he had in years. Finding Cassidy had changed something fundamental in him, had reminded him that life could be about more than just surviving day to day. Maybe he could build something real here, something lasting. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Cassidy threw herself into her work at the boarding house, grateful for the distraction and the purpose. Mrs. Peterson was patient and kind, teaching her the particular way she liked things done while also encouraging her to add her own touches. The other boarders were respectful, and word got around town about what had happened to her, which meant people were sympathetic rather than judgmental. Austin spent his days selling horses, and he proved as good at trading as he was at training. He sold them individually and in small groups to ranchers, farmers, and the cavalry post that maintained a presence in the area. The money he made was substantial, more than enough to buy land if he wanted it. Every evening he returned to the boarding house for dinner, and afterwards he and Cassidy would walk through town or sit in the parlor talking. They were courting, though neither said the word aloud. Everyone could see it, from Mrs. Peterson's knowing smiles to the other boarders' good-natured teasing. Cassidy found herself healing, not just physically but emotionally. The nightmares about the raid came less frequently, and while she still grieved her family, the crushing weight of it eased. Austin helped with that, his steady presence a reminder that life held good things too, not just tragedy. One evening, about 3 weeks after their arrival, Austin asked Cassidy to walk with him. They strolled through Scottsbluff as the sun set, eventually finding themselves at the base of the massive rock formation the town was named for. "I've been thinking," Austin said as they stood looking up at the ancient stone, "about what I want to do next." Cassidy's heart picked up speed. "And what's that?" "I want to buy land, build a ranch, raise horses and maybe cattle. Create something permanent instead of always moving from place to place." "That sounds wonderful." Austin turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I want to do it here near Scottsbluff." "I want to stay close to you, Cassidy. These past weeks with you have been the happiest I've been in years. You make me want to build a future again." Cassidy felt tears well up, but they were good tears. "I feel the same way. When I'm with you, I can imagine being happy again. Really happy, not just surviving." "I know it's fast," Austin continued. "I know we've only known each other for a short time, but out here, time works differently. Sometimes you know things quickly and you have to trust that knowing." "What are you saying?" Austin took a deep breath. "I'm saying that I'm falling in love with you, Cassidy Collins, and I'm asking if maybe someday you might consider building that future with me. Not right now, I know you need time, but someday." Cassidy's tears spilled over, but she was smiling. "I'm already in love with you, Austin Vaughn. And I don't need more time to know that. You saved my life, yes, but more than that, you gave me a reason to want to live it. So yes, someday soon I want to build a future with you." Austin pulled her into his arms, holding her close as relief and joy washed over him. Cassidy clung to him, feeling safe and loved and hopeful for the first time since the raid. They stood there together as the last light faded from the sky, two people who'd found each other in the vastness of the West and decided to hold on. Their courtship became official after that night. Austin properly asked Mrs. Peterson for permission to court Cassidy, a formality that made the older woman laugh and give her blessing. He started looking at land around Scottsbluff, parcels that had good water and grass for running horses. Cassidy continued working at the boarding house, but she and Austin spent every possible moment together. They attended church services on Sunday, went to town socials, and took long rides out into the prairie on Austin's horses. He taught her to ride better, and she helped him plan what his ranch would look like, where the house should go, how many horses he could support. 3 months after Cassidy stumbled into his camp, Austin finalized the purchase of 200 acres along the North Platte River, prime land with everything a rancher could want. The day he signed the papers, he took Cassidy out to see the property and they rode across it together, imagining the future taking shape. "There," Austin said, pointing to a slight rise with a good view of the surrounding area. "That's where I want to build the house. What do you think?" "It's perfect," Cassidy agreed. "You can see for miles and it's protected from the north wind by that line of trees." Austin dismounted and helped Cassidy down, then led her to stand on the exact spot he'd indicated. From here, they could see the ribbon of river to the south and the open prairie rolling away in every direction. "Cassidy," Austin said, taking her hands, "I don't want to build this house alone. I want to build it with you for you. I want to marry you and spend the rest of my life loving you." "Will you be my wife?" Cassidy didn't hesitate. "Yes. Yes, absolutely yes." Austin pulled out a simple gold band he'd been carrying in his pocket for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. He slipped it onto her finger and it fit perfectly. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Scottsbluff, with Mrs. Peterson and Jack from the stable standing as witnesses. Cassidy wore a new dress Mrs. Peterson had helped her make, pale blue calico with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Austin wore his best clothes, and when he saw Cassidy walking down the aisle toward him, his eyes filled with tears. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They spoke their vows clearly, meaning every word, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Austin kissed his bride tenderly while their small audience applauded. The reception was held at the boarding house, where Mrs. Peterson had prepared a feast and invited half the town. People brought gifts, practical things a young couple would need to start their life together. Furniture, dishes, linens, tools. The generosity overwhelmed Cassidy, and she cried happy tears multiple times throughout the evening. "You're one of us now," Mrs. Peterson said, hugging her. "This community takes care of its own." That night, Austin carried Cassidy over the threshold of their room at the boarding house, and they spent their first night as husband and wife wrapped in each other's arms, talking and laughing and making plans for the future. They would live at the boarding house while Austin built their home, working on construction between jobs he took breaking horses for local ranchers. The building process took all spring and into summer. Austin proved skilled at carpentry as well as everything else, and he built a solid house of lumber hauled from Cheyenne and stone quarried locally. It was modest but well made, with a main room, a kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a loft that could serve as additional space as needed. Cassidy helped when she could, but mostly she continued working for Mrs. Peterson, saving money to furnish their new home. She also spent time learning from the other ranch wives in the area, skills like preserving food, tending chickens, making soap. She was determined to be a capable ranch wife, to build a real partnership with Austin. They moved into their completed house in August of 1884, nearly a year after Cassidy had stumbled into Austin's camp. Standing together on the porch of their home, looking out over their land, they marveled at how much had changed. "You ever think about that night?" Cassidy asked, leaning against her husband. "How different things would be if I'd walked in any other direction?" "All the time," Austin admitted. "I think about how I almost camped somewhere else that night. How many small choices led to us finding each other." "Your purpose," Cassidy said, remembering what he'd told her that first night. "My purpose," Austin agreed. "Though it turns out you weren't just my purpose, you're my everything." Cassidy turned in his arms and kissed him. "And you're mine." They spent their first year of marriage working hard to establish their ranch. Austin bought more horses, a mix of wild Mustangs and quality breeding stock, and began building a reputation for well-trained, reliable animals. Cassidy managed their home and started a large garden, plus chickens and a milk cow. They hired a hand named Tom to help with the heavy work, a young man from town looking to learn the ranching business. Life was hard, the work constant and demanding. But it was good, satisfying in a way neither had experienced before. They were building something together, creating a life from the ground up. Every fence post Austin set, every meal Cassidy cooked, every sunset they watched together from their porch was part of that creation. The second winter in their home, Cassidy discovered she was pregnant. She told Austin on Christmas morning her gift to him, and he responded by picking her up and spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. "We're having a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We're going to be parents." "We are," Cassidy confirmed, her hand on her still flat stomach. "Come summer, there will be 3 of us." Austin knelt down and kissed her belly, then looked up at her with tears in his eyes. Thank you for giving me this life, this family." "Thank you for saving me," Cassidy replied, "for giving me a reason to live." "We saved each other," Austin said, standing and pulling her close. "And we're going to raise this child together and give them the best life we can." Their son was born in July of 1885, a healthy boy with Austin's eyes and Cassidy's dark hair. They named him Thomas after Austin's father, and he was perfect. Austin proved to be a devoted father, patient and loving with his son. Cassidy recovered well from the birth, and together they navigated the exhausting, wonderful world of new parenthood. The ranch continued to grow. Austin's reputation spread, and he had more business than he could handle. They hired another hand and bought more land, expanding their operations. Cassidy managed the household and raised Thomas, but she also kept the books for the ranch, having a head for numbers that Austin lacked. 2 years after Thomas was born, they had a daughter, Caroline, named after Cassidy's mother. She was tiny and fierce, and she wrapped both her parents and her older brother around her little finger from day one. Their family felt complete, though they talked about maybe having more children someday. Life settled into a rhythm of seasons and work and love. They faced challenges, as all ranchers did. Harsh winters, dry summers, predators after their stock, the occasional difficult horse or buyer. But they faced everything together, their partnership solid and strong. One evening in the fall of 1889, 6 years after Cassidy had stumbled into Austin's camp, they sat together on their porch watching Thomas and Caroline play in the yard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and the air smelled of hay and horses and home. "Are you happy?" Austin asked, his arm around his wife. Cassidy leaned her head on his shoulder. "More than I ever imagined I could be. There are still days I miss my first family, days when the grief catches me by surprise. But I have a second chance at family with you and the children, and I'm grateful for it every single day." "I'm grateful too. You gave me purpose when I'd lost mine. You made me want to build something lasting instead of just drifting through life." "We built it together," Cassidy corrected. "Everything here, we did together." "Together," Austin agreed, kissing the top of her head. "That's how we'll do everything for the rest of our lives." Their children grew strong and healthy. Thomas showed his father's gift with horses, while Caroline inherited her mother's head for business. They added another son, James, and then another daughter, Elizabeth, their family expanding to fill their home with noise and love and chaos. Austin became known throughout the region as the best horse trainer in Nebraska, and their ranch was prosperous. But he never let success go to his head, remaining the same solid, kind man he'd always been. He treated his hired hands fairly, helped neighbors when they struggled, and donated to the church and school. Cassidy became a pillar of the community, known for her strength and generosity. She never forgot what it was like to have nothing, to be alone and frightened, and she extended help to anyone who needed it. She and Mrs. Peterson remained close friends, and when the older woman eventually retired, Cassidy helped her find someone good to take over the boarding house. As the years passed and the children grew, Austin and Cassidy's love deepened rather than fading. They still made time for each other, still took rides out into the prairie when they could, still sat together on their porch in the evenings talking about their days. The attraction that had sparked between them during those first hard days never diminished. It just matured into something richer and more complex. "You remember what you said that first night?" Cassidy asked one evening when they were alone, the children all in bed. "About stumbling into situations and deciding what to make of them. I remember. You were right. I stumbled into your camp half dead and you decided to save me. We decided to love each other, and we made this." She gestured around them at their home and land and life. "Best decisions I ever made," Austin said. "Mine too." They watched the stars come out, sitting close together the way they had that first night beside the campfire. So much had changed, but the fundamental thing that drew them together remained constant. They'd found each other in the vastness of the West, two lost souls who became found. Their children grew up and started their own lives. Thomas took over the main horse operation, while James preferred working cattle and started his own small, spread on land Austin helped him purchase. Caroline married a banker from town and moved to Cheyenne, while Elizabeth became a teacher in Scottsbluff. Austin and Cassidy became grandparents, delighting in their grandchildren while enjoying the slower pace of life as they aged. They remained active in running the ranch, but they also took time to rest, to enjoy what they'd built. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Austin took Cassidy back to the place where her life had changed, where she'd stumbled into his camp. It took some searching to find the exact spot, but they managed it, following the landmarks Austin remembered. They stood together in that place, older now but still deeply in love. Austin had gray in his hair and lines around his eyes, while Cassidy's dark hair showed silver threads and her face bore the marks of years of sun and laughter. 20 years, Cassidy said. "From dying in the desert to this. It doesn't seem real sometimes." "It's real," Austin assured her. "Every bit of it, the good and the hard, all of it real and all of it worth it." "You gave me everything," Cassidy said. "A home, a family, a life worth living." "You gave me purpose," Austin replied. "You gave me a reason to stop drifting and start building. You made me better than I was." We made each other better. They renewed their vows right there in that spot, just the two of them and God and the vast Wyoming sky. They spoke the same words they'd said 20 years before in the Scottsbluff church, but they meant even more now, weighted with 2 decades of lived experience, of joy and sorrow and everything in between. That night they camped in the same spot, for old time's sake, though with considerably more comfort than that first desperate night. They lay together under the stars, Austin's arm around Cassidy like always, and talked about their life. "If you could go back and change anything, would you?" Austin asked. Cassidy thought about her first family, about the tragedy that had set her on this path. The grief was still there, probably always would be, but time and love had softened its edges. "I wish they hadn't died," she said honestly. "I wish that evil hadn't touched them. But I can't wish away what came after, because that would mean losing you and the children and everything we've built. So no, I wouldn't change anything. This is my life, and I'm grateful for all of it. Even the hard parts, even the hard parts. They made me who I am." Austin held her closer. "I feel the same way. Losing my first family was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but it led me to you. And you're the best thing that ever happened to me." They fell asleep there under the stars, just as they had so many years ago. Two people who'd found each other against all odds and built a love story for the ages. The years continued to pass. Austin and Cassidy grew old together, their love never wavering. They celebrated births and mourned deaths, weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, and through it all, they had each other. When Austin was 72 and Cassidy 68, they sat together on their porch one summer evening, watching the sun set over land their children and grandchildren now worked. They'd handed over the main operations years ago, but still lived in the house Austin had built, still walked the property they loved every day their health allowed. "It's been a good life," Austin said, his voice slower but still strong. "The best life," Cassidy agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible. That night I stumbled into your camp. You were so thin," Austin remembered, "so close to death I wasn't sure you'd make it. But you fed me. You saved me. You gave me a future. We gave each other a future. You saved me just as much as I saved you." Cassidy took his weathered hand in hers, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. "I love you, Austin Vaughn. I've loved you since almost the first moment I saw you, and I'll love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too, Cassidy Vaughn. You're my heart, my purpose, my everything." They sat together as the sun disappeared and the stars emerged, the same stars they'd watched together for 50 years of marriage. Around them, their legacy lived on in children and grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren, in the ranch that bore their name, in the community they'd helped build. They'd started with nothing but each other, two broken people who found healing in love. And from that foundation, they'd created something beautiful and lasting, a life full of meaning and purpose and joy. As night fell completely, they finally rose and went inside their home, the home Austin had built for Cassidy all those years ago. They prepared for bed with the comfortable routine of an old married couple, each knowing exactly how the other moved and what they needed. That night, they fell asleep in each other's arms, just as they had every night of their marriage. Austin's last thought before sleep claimed him was gratitude, pure and simple, for the woman beside him and the life they'd shared. Cassidy's last thought was similar, a prayer of thanks for the cowboy who'd fed her when she was starving, who'd given her purpose when she had none, who'd loved her so completely that she'd learned to live again. They'd found each other in the wilderness, and they'd built paradise together. Two hearts that had been lost, now permanently, perfectly found. Their love story became legend in Scottsbluff and the surrounding area, passed down through generations. People told the story of how Cassidy Collins had stumbled into Austin Vaughn's camp half-starved, how the cowboy had fed her and found his purpose, how their love had built an empire and raised a family that continued to thrive decades later. It was a story about survival and second chances, about choosing to live and love even after loss. It was about two people who could have remained broken, but instead helped each other heal. It was about purpose found in the most unexpected place, in the vastness of the Wyoming wilderness on a fall night in 1883. And every time the story was told, it ended the same way, with Austin and Cassidy growing old together surrounded by the family and life they'd created, their love enduring until the very end and beyond, a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and choosing to build rather than drift. They'd saved each other, loved each other, and created something beautiful together. And that was the best ending anyone could hope for.